All right, welcome back, brother Mark Stoddard. Uh, we've had Mark on a few times, and
Always fun.
it's always fun.
Oh yeah, I enjoy
Uh,
it.
and before I get started, Mark, uh, I want to introduce you again, and I'm going to use the one from Meridian Magazine. Is that bio still kind of up to date?
That's close. Yeah.
Well, correct me if you want to.
Oh, it's okay. I just went through it the other day and I changed a few things, but it wasn't
Okay.
anything significant.
Well, for more than 30 years, Mark has been a successful entrepreneur, marketer, and educator. In 1990, the USSR's Deputy Minister of Higher Education brought Mark to teach free market business principles to leaders of the president's cabinet, got him to be the first foreigner to address the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine and provide intensive, what was that?
That's true.
Oh, okay. Invite and to provide intensive, let's see, I lost my place here. Oh, here we are. Intensive lectures to civic leaders on a 17 city speaking tour. He was the entrepreneur in residence at Utah Valley University and often teaches entrepreneur classes. He's authored 18. Have you authored more than 18 books now? Or are you still at 18?
My wife says 15 and three handbooks. And I put them all together. It's the same process if it's 20 pages or 300. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So many books, more than 18 on business, short stories, poems, and full-length musicals. And as I've gotten to know you in the short time that I have, Mark, you have a knack for quotes. You have a lot of quotes in your head there, don't you? That you like to conjure up, and I think that's amazing.
Well, some
And
people say I'm good at making up stuff, but others, I hope that's not the case.
he has served the church in numerous capacities, including bishoprics in California, BYU, and Ohio. Bye, son. You going for your walk? All right, we'll see you. And Ohio, his adventures are as a primary teacher and chorister are in his story. My primary colors are black and blue. He and Elizabeth live in Spanish Fork, Utah, and have 7 children and 24 grandchildren or more now.
Well, that's actually one of the things that changed is that we've now moved to Payson. We decided Spanish Fork city life was too congested for us.
Okay.
So we moved down to Payson, and we now have 25 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
Awesome. And that is the blessings of posterity, right?
Oh yeah, they're a lot of fun. It's love it.
Well, I'm 51. I'll be 52 this October, and I don't have grandchildren yet. But I didn't have my first child till I was 28. And my younger brother, who's 7 years younger than me, already has grandchildren. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's life is always unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, as they say, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah. That is so true. Isn't that true? Because he changes things, right? Well, he doesn't change, but he knows the outcome,
He
right?
knows the outcome.
He knows he knows what really lies in store for you, right? And that it's not always what we want, but sometimes it's what, if we're on his plan, which I think most people are, whether they know it or not, right?
Well, I was Stephen Covey, as we spent a lot of time together at the institute I created, and he was a specialist in time management. And I says, "Come on, Steve, can you really manage time?" And he'd just laugh and go, well, you can put down what you would like to accomplish and then work towards it. So it just, yeah. So that's good luck in managing time.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's almost like an oxymoron kind of.
Yeah, yeah, very much.
Okay, so you and I, before we got on, we were talking about, okay, so I talked to you a couple, all right, let me start here. Sorry, I get scatterbrained when I get excited because this is really exciting to me, especially in the time that we're in with a lot of social uh, dilemmas. I guess, I don't know, there's a lot of political, ideological differences in the world today, and they're showing their ugly heads and their good heads at the same time. But we talked a couple days ago about an article that you recently published in Meridian magazine, and you write for LDS Living. You're a blogger, basically. All, like, would you say,
Yeah,
an edit, you're a journalist, you
yeah.
write articles. uh Before, in the past, we talked about the Rus, the painting. If you guys want to, I'll put the links to the other videos that he has. He has a playlist already on my channel, so this video will be on that playlist. I forgot the other thing that we talked about. What was that? Let's see. There was the Rus
But
painting.
the Book of Mormon has great literature.
That's right. That's right. Okay. And they're very interesting videos. So when you talked to me a couple days ago, you sent me the email, and I read it. I'm at a loss for words because I see this this relates dramatically, I would say, to what's going on today. Would you say?
Well, yeah,
I know that's kind of vague, but go ahead.
what the article was meant to do for the 4th of July is there are many reasons why America is great, and I had to make sure I used the right phrase, otherwise people get politically hysterical. Instead of saying "make America great again," I said 3 things that make the USA great. And there's many things that do it. I just picked out 3 I thought were particularly cogent and applicable to today, that of freedom, opportunity, and charity. Those 3 things distinguished the USA in so many ways from the rest of the world. And
Well, I forgot to mention the name of your article is 3 Things That Keep Making the USA Great Again, and it was published July 2nd, 2023. It's not a long article, brothers and sisters. I'll leave the link. We're not going to read it because we want you to go read it, but we're going to talk about why these things are relevant today, why it's important to talk about it. But go ahead, because I have a couple of questions I want to ask right after that.
I probably ought to begin. I mean, if I was listening to this broadcast or watching this broadcast and figure out who's this Herkimer that's talking about America, what his qualifications, whatever else. Let me give a little bit of background in this area. My father was in the U.S. Air Force. He was a World War II pilot, POW, highly decorated hero, and we lived the Air Force life. And in doing so, the last place we lived in the United States was Arizona when I was freshman, sophomore in high school. And then we moved to England. And that was during the 60s, the tumultuous 60s, when everything was changing, free love, Vietnam War, protests, all of that kind of stuff. And so everything was kind of politically in tune. You almost couldn't get away from political discussions and hearing about it. And in Arizona, which tends to be, well, it used to be a very conservative state. And somebody handed me a copy of Cleon Skousen's The Naked Communist. So I read it when I was 15, and I thought sure seemed to be overblown and hysterical itself. And I thought, well, I ought to give the other side a chance. And so we moved to England. I happened upon at our school library the Communist Manifesto, which was written by Vladimir Lenin, and Das Kapital, which was written by, of course, Karl Marx. And I thought, oh, I have to read this. So I started reading those, and I read them quite a bit. And the thing that struck me was how patently absurd everything that he was saying was. I kept trying to find something that I could counter Cleon Skousen with. Years later, Cleon Skousen and I met several times, and I brought this up to him. He got a good laugh out of it. He had a great sense of humor. But that kind of started me on a road of being very interested in politics and getting involved with them. I've been involved with a number of presidential campaigns, and I wrote the whole platform out for Ron Packard, who was the first congressman to ever win a write-in campaign. We managed his campaign on that. And I was in Washington, D.C. for several years as a director of an organization called Free the Eagle, which was a citizens' lobby for free market economics and politics discussions. And we were involved in quite a few things there. So I've experienced a number of things as well as research into those into the area of politics. So when I got a letter from the Soviet Union in 1990, I was rather fearful, frankly, because there was a book that had come out exposing our organization's work in throwing the Soviets out of Afghanistan and laying all the blame for it on us. And we were decried by Radio Moscow and TASS and Pravda and all the rest of them by name. And so I got this envelope, and I was going, oh, has this got Ryzen in it? Or some kind of a bomb? What's going on? So we were very carefully checked it. And that's when Mikhail Gorbachev's Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Elvin Kalinian, invited me to go to the Soviet Union and to teach free market economics there. He had found one of my books on starting and running a business, and it was translated into Russian. I didn't get any royalties on it, but that's nothing new. So that got me even more enmeshed and ingrained.
Well, writers don't normally become writers to get rich, right? Those who have a passion for writing.
That's true. That's true. And you can't worry about those kinds of things. So, I've had a chance to really explore. Oh, I should mention one other thing. When I was in high school, my senior year, because of the research work I was doing on Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, my civics teachers were interested as I would bring stuff up. And so we had a lot of discussions on all of that, pro and con. I like to look at all sides of issues. There's many different things. And BBC came to our American high school in London, England, and asked us, they wanted to talk to an American teenager about America and all that sort of stuff. So my teacher said, well, have Stoddard do it. So they brought me in, and it became very clear what the BBC interviewer was trying to do, was trying to trap me and trying to catch me up, and that I was some dumb local yokel American kid who only liked girls and hot dogs, which I did. But it was kind of interesting as he began asking these loaded questions, those kind of questions like the lawyer asked the guy on the stand, how long's it been since you beat your wife? And you can't give it, yes or no. Are you still beating your wife? And that typical journalism,
right?
I'd been through that route as well. So I began quoting from him out of Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto that these are their goals. This is what they want to do. This is the whole operation. It's all right there, plain black and white. And they were, he didn't like my answers. In fact, he stopped the interview several times, and then he kept trying a different tact and a different tact. And then it was a 3-hour interview, and he finally just stopped. And
so how old were you at the time again?
16 and a half, 17.
Okay, so this was after you decided, hey, I'm not going to let somebody indoctrinate me. I'm going to find out for myself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And little did they know that you were studied up on Karl Marx and Lenin.
Yeah, and we had a very good.
So that was just a coincidence, really, that this guy's interviewing you and you happen to know your stuff.
Yeah, it was, and we had a very, very good high school. An American high school in England was fantastic. It was intense. Our high school was very intense, a lot of studying. And so I had teachers that really emphasized trying to get us to think and to look at sides and do research and try to, a lot of Plato and archetypes. And so
yeah,
that was all very good. So that helped me to look at the United States. And living in England at the time, Harold Wilson was the prime minister. And that was the time that they began nationalizing, socializing many, many industries, the coal industry, the steel industry, the shipping industry. The government had taken them all over, and which sent the British economy into a tailspin that Margaret Thatcher fortunately came in eventually and pulled it out and stopped the nonsense. So it really forced me to see various places in the economies. And since that time, I've been to Russia more than 50 times and to probably 120 countries in the world and examining them. So when I say there's 3 things I selected out there, the most important one for me, and anybody else can have theirs, I welcome it, is freedom. It has to begin there and end there. We have, when Jefferson and the other people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, that was their number one thing. And I love to quote in the article Carl Sandburg. Freedom is a habit and a coat worn, some born to wear it, some never to know it. And it bothers me that there are so many countries in the world where the freedoms are not there. And it bothers me to see how many things go on in this country where we chip away at those freedoms. Now, we know that we can't have a society where everybody can do anything they want. You do not have the freedom to come into my house and take my goods without my permission. Well, somebody who wanted to be an anarchist could say, well, that's my total freedom. Well, that's nonsense. So we begin with that, and then we say, what is it as a society where we can have the absolute maximum possible number of freedoms? Anyway, I've talked too much.
No, you haven't talked too much. I love what you're saying. Well, okay, so let me ask you this then. Out of your article, you say for centuries the world and America have been arguing about whether America is great and what is great, if anything, about her. After years of traveling the world, creating companies in America and being involved in the political process, I've concluded America is great, and you said for 3 reasons: freedom, opportunity, and charity. And you said freedom is the most important. Would you say that's because without freedom, you won't have the other 2?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So why do you feel, when we were talking on the phone, we were talking a lot about charity. You were emphasizing a lot about that, and that intrigued me, because it almost seems as though without a free, why? Okay, this boggles my mind. Maybe you can answer it. Why does it seem like communist countries, or countries that have not just communist, but a totalitarian regime, totalitarianism, and look at North Korea. You've got the the pariahs, and the not just the Soviet Union. Why does it seem like, and even China, why is charity absent on a personal level almost? Is it because that type of ideology or government suppresses the ability to be benevolent and altruism and
Yeah.
all of
Well,
those things, or are those people already conditioned? Is it because those people were already like that, and that's why communism uh, flourishes there? What do you think about that?
well, you ask it. There's several different questions in there, but I'm going to stick.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. That's what our minds should be doing.
Yeah, why do the people seem to be cold-hearted?
Well, let me first of all go to the systems. When you have people that think they're smarter than everybody else, and that they know best what's good for you, and they take away your freedoms so they can give you a better life, is what they always say. I love how I think it was one of the founding fathers, suddenly his name just left me, made the statement that the Constitution was there to protect us from the best intentions of other people. Okay, protect us from the best intentions of other people. Well, these leaders say, I know what's best for you, and they begin to set up laws. Well, in doing so, they believe that the government is the best source to do it. And so therefore, the government will take care of all people. And if there's a poor person, well, it's the government's responsibility, not yours, to feed them and to clothe them, and take care of them. Consequently, people don't take care of each other because that's anti-government. And so they don't. They would also not be of a mindset because they don't have the money. And when I was lecturing in the Soviet Union, I would ask them that question: what's the average income in the Soviet Union today? And they would say, well, that's easy. It's $200 a month, because everybody got $200 a month. You hear people calling all the time in this country for a government wage. Everybody gets the same amount. Well, that's total nonsense. And it's totally destructive to an economy. And I said, no, that's not true. You actually get $10,000 a month. They're going, yeah. I said, well, let's see. Let's think about it. How much does it cost in the Soviet Union to take a plane ride anywhere in the Soviet Union? It was $25. Okay. And instantly you could hear people in America, well, yeah, that's the way it ought to be. It said, okay, in your apartments, where does your heat come from? Well, they all come from a central boiler. How much does it cost you? Nothing. All right, your medications, your doctors, your hospitals, which, by the way, were terrible. We had one of our ladies got her leg broken and had to be taken to a hospital. We were doing tours there in 1991. And, it was filthy. I went into the operating room and that far away from the edge of the wall was black, because when they clean it, they just kind of move it out. Nobody really paid attention to it. And I could go on with the terrible things. Mm-hmm. And I went through, gasoline, what does it cost? Well, like 10 cents a gallon. And how much does a car cost? Well, $2,000 or $3,000. I said, Where does the money come from that? The government withholds it from your salary because you're getting $9,800 worth of free goods and they leave you $200 of discretionary income. That's how much, that's what it really is just $10,000. I had a conversation like this with one of the top administrators at BYU, and he brought me in to say, how do we manage people complaining about BYU's tuition? I said, well, the problem is you're not telling them the truth. How much is the tuition? At the time, it was like $1,500 and they wanted to raise it to $1,800. I said, you need to tell them that the tuition is $10,000 and the LDS church is subsidizing them by $8,500. That's what the real truth is. If you tell it that way, people will stop complaining about it and go, oh yeah, we're getting a good deal. Somebody else is helping. So that goes into the heart of all of this is all of the government is spending all this money on people and they do not want other people to take away their power.
Right.
And now, you asked the question about why do people think that way? Well, that's a whole different, we could spend a whole different discussion, but part of it is that when the government has gone down that path and has absolute power, you dare not object to it.
Well, you even mentioned in your article, you talk about Dan Brown's novel Angels and Demons.
Yes.
And I kind of think this is very relative to what we're talking about at this moment. The lead character, Robert Langdon, this is what you wrote, is an American professor who prides himself on being an atheist. After hearing him make many jabs at the Catholic Church, the head of the Vatican police gave it back to him and said, I know how many millions of people my church has fed, housed, and rescued. How many has your church helped, Mr. Langdon? Atheist Langdon grimaced and said nothing. Would you say also that most of these societies are without religion, without God, and that the
yes,
the teachings of God help altruism exist, right?
I mentioned in the article as well,
and true philanthropy.
that Alexis de Tocqueville in about 1830, coincidentally, Joseph Smith's time, did a tour of America to try to figure out why this fledgling nation had become so prosperous and so strong so quickly. We beat the British in 1814, actually, by the time we kicked them out. I mean, that was the greatest army in the world had ever known at that time. And we beat them. He couldn't figure that out. And so he came to America and he quotes, and I quoted in the article, but just basically, if you want to know what makes America great, it's because America is good. And I did not realize this until, he says, until I went to its churches and listening to the fiery preacher talk to people about morality and honesty and caring for one another, and taking that our job is to care for one another, not the government's job. Our job is to care for one another. And again, he says, America is great because America is good. And America will cease to be great when America ceases to be good. Now that goes right to the heart of the charity. Now let me give your listeners this fact. When I was talking to the Politburo in Ukraine, I asked them, what is the gross domestic product of the Soviet Union? And we had the Minister of Finance there, and he told us exactly. It was $490 billion or so. It's approximately. I said, would you like to know how much charity is given in the United States? How much money each year goes to charitable causes by individuals and some foundation? 70-80% of all charitable donations come from individuals in the United States. Charitable foundations and groups and other kinds of things bring up the other 20, 25%, 30%. But the rest of it is all individuals. And they said, yeah. I said, it's approximately $490 billion.
Wow.
The United States people on their own give away more money than the Soviet Union's entire GDP. And as a side note, since they got rid of communism, their GDP has doubled. That's another discussion, right? But they could not believe that people spent their time volunteered, because I had how many man hours had people donated in time working in soup kitchens, helping in homeless shelters, going down and I told them as a kid, we used to go to pear orchards and cotton fields in Arizona for the church. All of that went to help feed the poor, and that was all volunteer labor, and they could not believe it. And if any of our listeners have ever been to what was the Soviet Union, and it's gotten better today, but the Soviet Union, the kvartiri, which are the big apartment complexes, you walk in there and it's dark, the floors are dirty, there's smell of urine. You look up and half the lights are missing, and the elevator sometimes doesn't work. You manage to get up there, and then you go into their apartments, and they're beautiful, well taken care of, appointed very nicely, and just very comfortable. It's because it was theirs. And the foyer was the government's responsibility. And when everybody owns it, nobody takes care of it. It's a very good lesson on why charity. And so my point is, when we have all these charitable things going on, and again, churches are the most important part of that whole equation, as de Tocqueville said, it's the one that organizes people and gets them to focus on something other than themselves,
right,
and to contribute to each other. Go ahead.
Well, here's a quote really quick from a guy named Carlos Martinez, and tell me, well, I know you're going to agree with it because it's everything you've just been talking about, but he said, governments and then after I read this, I want to kind of segue into something. Governments by definition are incapable of charity. Government's extents implies coercion. Therefore, any course of action they proceed to is policy making, like you're talking about, not charity. And when we talk about charity, we're not just talking about money giving. We're talking about people helping people on the streets.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, like earlier I said, why do people seem to be so cold-hearted in these totalitarian governments? Not all of them are, but most of the people that you see help others out of the kindness of their heart, 9 times out of 10, they have religion in their life, or they're doing it privately underground, right? So
Yeah.
they're not, the atheist, if you're raised atheist, or you've been conditioned to be a godless people, it's hard to in other words, you kind of have to practice being Christ-like. Is a gift, and it's something you have to practice, and you can't practice it if you don't have God in your life, if you don't have a family teaching you. That's why we go to church every Sunday. It's not something that just comes natural in human beings. We have to practice being good.
Well,
right?
I wonder about what you just said, because one of the things,
there are natural parts of us that do,
I'm
but you know
saying
what
is,
I'm saying. Go ahead.
yeah, what I'm saying is the light of Christ is within everybody. And many times we have to get the world out of our way. and allow the light of Christ to be able to work through us, because there are universals. Every country I've ever been into, I notice that when I teach my students at the universities, I'd say, ask them, are you, how important is doing good? How natural is it? And do we need to be organized to do this? And the answer is no. We don't need to be organized. We need to let people have the opportunity and let the light of Christ come in. So when they see a neighbor, their first reaction becomes what Christ would want them to do, which is to help each other. And
well, but we are organized as far as, you know, we have churches, we have
no question.
ecclesiastical leaders, but that's not what you mean.
No,
we don't need a government telling us now is the time to be charitable and now is the time not to.
Got to be bottom up. It has to be bottom up. It cannot be top down. And I don't know what the church was like when you were a kid. Were you around when there were bake sales and Relief Society?
Yes, we had road shows, we had bake sales, we had
things to raise money for the building fund.
Well, primary was on Wednesday. It wasn't on Sunday. Sunday school was different from primary.
My point is were you around when we were raising money for buildings?
Yes, my grandfather. Okay, I grew up here in this town. My grandpa, who wasn't even active in church, he smoked cigarettes. He wasn't active. He helped build the chapel.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the bishop asked him, he was a carpenter. He was a foreman, and he was in the carpenters union here in California, in Central California. And he helped build the chapel in the late 60s because that's the way they did it.
Yeah. Well, the question I have too is how many talks in church and general conference were about tithing? Quite a few. Windows of heaven, we got all that kind of stuff. When's the last time you heard anybody mention money from the pulpit?
That's because we're a tithing paying, for the most part, we are good about paying tithing.
Yeah, I mean, it's people, the conflicts of tithing have pretty well gone away from it. People have said, I understand why I pay tithing, and I consider it an honor to pay tithing. But we had a fellow, we were teaching in Canberra, Australia, when I was a missionary in Australia there. And we got to the sixth discussion, which was the tithing discussion. And we asked the bishop to come along because this guy lived a couple doors down from the church. And the bishop knew him and said, oh, yeah, I'll come sometime. So I thought, I think I want him to come for the tithing discussion. And so we got through it, and the bishop said, how do you feel about it? He goes, 10%. I don't think I can do that. That's a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. And he said, so they did mention about 10%, the elders did. So yeah, just, did they talk about building fund? No. Well, we need you to contribute for the building fund too. Did they talk about fast offerings? No. And he went through several of these, and the guy is freaking out, and he explained each one of them. He says, okay. He says, let me ask you this question. What percentage of your income would you like to contribute? What would you feel comfortable doing? He said, well, I think maybe 3 or 4%. And the bishop said, that's fine with me. You go ahead and do that. And I'll give my recommendation that you be baptized. Right. So he's baptized. Well, about 6 weeks later, it's when I went home, and I went to the bishop. I said, how's it brother so-and-so doing? And he goes, he hasn't missed a tithing of 10%.
Ah, great.
So
that is beautiful. I love that. And were the policies different back then? I like, as far as recommend, what am I trying to say? requirements for baptism and requirements for temple recommends. When did tithing come into the temple recommend
Well,
interview?
I'm not sure when, but I know that I was the zone leader, and so I had the authority to, in our area, to be able to approve that. And but I turned to the bishop and I said, "Can I do that?" And he goes, "You have my permission." I went,
Yeah,
"It's for me."
that
So,
is so neat. I
and I
love it.
figured that he was inspired, and he was, and I've seen that so many times, and it comes from inside, and that light of Christ just permeates and allows us to know that I want to be able to pay my tithing. And so you go back to Robert Langdon, and you how much atheists help out. It's
Yeah.
so little amount, and people in see, I love people, all people of faith. I don't care what their doctrines are. We can discuss those, and
No,
don't worry about it.
right. That's not relevant to the conversation right now.
I love
Right.
people of faith that they're trying to do stuff. And
Absolutely.
Alexis de Tocqueville was very right. People of faith understand charity and want to do it. And freedom allows us to be able to do it, because freedom will not let the government come in and take away one of the most important things we can do, which is to love thy neighbor as thyself. I have to tell you, L. Ray Christiansen, I don't know if you remember him. He was a general authority.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he came out to our mission, and he gave a talk, and he says, yeah, the second commandment is love thy neighbor as thyself, although I think that's maybe more good in theory than practice, because in practice, I don't know if people could stand that much affection. We love each other. We love ourselves too much. But yeah, it was a good point. But yeah, that's the critical thing.
So here's what I wanted to segue into. Why write this article now? And I think I might know the answer, but what inspired you to talk about how great America is and the differences between because when we think of nationalism, something bad goes into a lot of people's heads, especially since, and I do not want to get into specific political things. We're not going to do that. Okay. Not that, and I think that you and I are probably on the same page as far as that goes. But I think my point is of course, there have been bad uses of the word nationalism, like during World War II. You had the Nationalist Socialist Party, right? Which was the Nazis. I think I'm saying it wrong or right.
That's okay.
The socialist nationalists. I don't know.
It's national socialism.
Right. And then there's good nationalism, which means we
love
believe
your country.
We love our country.
That's
and
it.
you can love a good country and be a nationalist.
Hey, what was the first nation on earth?
The city of Enoch? I don't know.
No,
Babylon.
the United States of America was
the
first nation on earth.
Right. No, you're totally right. And the first constitution, really, when you think about it, I mean, I don't think even Greece and Rome had the same kind of structure that we had. I mean, they had democracy, but it was still led by.
It was a monarchy still.
Yeah, it was a parliamentary monarchy, basically.
Yeah.
But why this today? And the other thing I want to go with that question is, because I've been thinking about, since I read this, I've been thinking about J. Reuben Clark, why we don't hear talks like that anymore, or is it even necessary because it's already been said? And then also, it's a loaded question. Are we seeing something bigger now than just individual countries? In the old days, it was communism in the USSR, but now there's something bigger. Would you agree with that?
Well, you asked me, why did I write this article? Well, nothing quite so pure. Maureen Proctor is talking to me one day, and he said, well, when are you going to write your next article? I said, well, when do you need it? He says, well, I need it for the 4th of July. I went, oh, great. So I had to sit down and start thinking about what I was going to do, and which caused me to think, what makes this country great? And that's when I pretty much hit on those three cornerstones. You know, we haven't mentioned opportunity, but freedom allows for opportunity. Charity allows for opportunity to serve. And freedom allows us to choose what the opportunity is. So they're all kind of three meshed together. And every country in the world that is having problems of any sort, they go back to those three principles, and they will do a 180. It'll change everything. But again, you probably, until you have a faithful citizenry, you're going to be struggling at it. And it's the faith that is the mortar between all the bricks that holds it all together.
Well, you're old enough to remember the late 60s, right? Yes, of
Oh,
course.
I was a teenager. Like I said, I grew up, my junior and senior year were in London when the Beatles were starting,
Right.
going, and the Stones, and I went to concerts in the Wembley Stadium and went down to Carnaby Street. So, you know, all the hippies. Yeah, I went through all that.
Well, and you're also familiar with people like Yuri Bezmenov, right?
I don't know Yuri Bezmenov.
Oh, well, he was a communist that defected.
Oh, okay.
And he talked about how a country can be taken over slowly by communism.
Oh, yeah.
Would you say some of the, and I don't want to put you on the spot with specific things, but because I know, okay,
I
fine.
care.
Well, also YouTube might kick me off. I have to be careful because YouTube is run by Google, and
No,
you know what I'm saying. I don't need to go. You're not an idiot. You know what I'm talking about.
The question is,
do you see some of that today happening? I mean, America's still a good country, but is it scary what's happening?
Well, go back to the quote I gave you before about the Constitution was created to protect us against the best intentions of other people. Now, I believe most people have good intentions. They just don't realize that what their intentions are going to lead to. You know, you've talked to people who are from African-American descent, and many that I know, when we get in discussions, one of the things they cannot stand is being patronized and talked to. They feel like so many people are there to take the care of the poor black man. They're human beings, for heaven's sakes. Talk to them as a human being. They, if you know Jeff Chapman, he was a famous basketball player at BYU, and he joined the church at BYU and moved to Vancouver, Washington, where he still lives. Great guy. His wife, Leah, wonderful lady, and all their children. They have a ton of children, all playing basketball. I think their one son played at BYU. Anyway, Jeff Chapman, I had him go to the Soviet Union with me. And I told him, I said, be careful when you go through customs line that you select, because we'll be split up. Make sure that the people ahead of you in line are obviously not from like China or particularly North Vietnam, and make sure that they aren't people who are Black Africans, people from the countries of Africa. Mm-hmm. He looked at me and goes, well, I'm Black. I says, you're an American. And when you walk in that line, every one of those customs guys knows you are an American.
Right.
And they can see it all over your face. They can see it the way you walk, everything about it. He thought, that's nonsense. So after he got through customs, I says, how did it go? And he goes, I saw the two guys ahead of me were from Vietnam. I saw something on their luggage. So I moved lines. And they saw, when I went through lines, they looked at me and went, go through. Just moving on. He was shocked. And he saw the guys that were, the two guys from Vietnam were being strip searched.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, being an American shows in your face. It's the attitude of freedom. It's the feeling like I can do anything. And that all comes from freedom, opportunity, and charity. All of it is tied together.
Well, and I have hope for our Constitution. But this is the first time I've ever seen. We've heard words like, the Constitution will be hanging by a thread by Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith said, and people get it mixed up. He said, if it were to be saved, it will be saved by the members of the church or the elders of the church. But then later on, Ezra Taft Benson said it will be saved. But either way, this is the first time I've ever seen it hanging by a thread. I can honestly say it's definitely hanging, but it's still the best country on the planet. And I have hope. Don't forget,
we had 3 Supreme Court decisions that established freedom of speech, right? And freedom of movement by eliminating, what do you call it? Checking the box, what your race is.
Right.
Those 3 decisions are all freedom related and all constitutional related. And people are saying, oh, the Supreme Court's radical. No, it's not. It's constitutional. And they're doing their job and they're interpreting it by the Constitution. That gives me a lot of hope. Although, these things all go like this. They're all ebbs and flows. Am I worried about America? Yeah. And I think everybody, all citizens ought to be worried about America.
We've always been at some point worried about America, right?
Eternal vigilance is the cost of freedom. We have to be always on guard.
On guard, right? And we've always been on guard. I remember seeing, you're right. We've always been on guard. There's always been a little bit of urgency about protecting America. Not a little, but a lot. I remember political cartoons I've seen, you can see them on YouTube from the 1940s that they would show in between double features, right?
Yeah.
And they were about communism and protecting against communism. And I know sometimes maybe they got a little radical or maybe this or that or extreme. I don't know. I didn't live back then. I know some people said that there were a lot of, during the, what was his name that was accusing all the Hollywood people? McCarthy. Some say he was a great guy. Others say he was a whack job. I don't know. I didn't live back then.
No, he was wrong. He was a whack job. I mean,
he took things to an extreme.
You don't have any business talking to people. You're a senator. Be a senator, not an inquisitor. He was holding an inquisition. It was wrong.
Right. It turned into something very horrible. Right. Yeah, I agree.
It's very possible for everybody in any political party to go to wild extremes. You need to go to church every Sunday and get your grounding there. And by the way, to further emphasize that, when you start looking at the financial contributions of congressmen and senators, what their charitable contributions are, I mean, incomes of $200, $300, $500, $1 million, and they think they're doing a lot by giving $10,000.
Right.
Big. Again, common ordinary Americans don't think that way, which I'm a big believer that Americans ought to wake up to doing term limits, not by statute.
I agree.
But by moral choice, that we look and say, you've been in twice, we're not voting for you again.
Why didn't the founding fathers do term limits on senators?
Because they want the American people to vote and be in charge. They're the sovereigns. Take responsibilities seriously. You're the sovereign, then act like it. Now,
and the founding fathers knew that we were going to have times where people were weak, right?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example of this. I was district chairman of the Republican Party, District 69, or I don't remember what it was. And we had in Utah the whole idea of caucuses where the citizens would get together and elect, people to go to represent them at the state level, to make recommendations on policies and everything else. Great idea. And so we really stepped up the work to try to get people to come to the caucus meetings. And President Monson gave it quite, as it was read in church, participate in the caucus meetings. Come on, folks, get out there. What percentage of the caucuses in my district came? 3%.
Yeah.
3%. Well, the Constitution's hanging by the thread when 3% of the population are being active in the political process.
So when people are talking, okay, so I'm going to bring it up, and you can answer in a vague way, you can answer specifically, or whatever. You've heard that. Well, I know you've heard people talk about shadow governments, right? They talk about the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories, but I do believe that there are conspiracy facts too, and we've heard that in the past. We've heard Ezra Taft Benson say that. Now, and not to get into that, too deep, but my question is, are the three branches of government still active like they should be? And if we're worried about shadow governments or entities or I'll just say fake philanthropists funding people's for that aren't American citizens, maybe funding some of these people that run for office, the founding fathers were like, you don't have to worry about it, like you're saying, if you're involved as a people, right? If you're voting that's why I believe in some of these term limits. How do you feel about shadow governments? How do you feel about stuff like that? Do you think
they've always been there?
They've always been there, right?
They always will be there. It's simply,
Britain was even doing that, right?
Well,
back in the old days.
No, Britain has the shadow government. I mean, they have.
What I'm saying is they were even though after the War of 1812 was over, they were still involved. They got involved once in a while in our politics.
I give you a thing. First of all, I've been listening to various conspiracies since I was 16. And I'm a lot older than 16 now. I'm older.
Right.
And I'm going, well, they must not be very effective, because they haven't managed to make many of these goals actually.
That's a very good point.
So we're
still doing okay here, aren't we?
When I was a freshman at BYU, one guy was just going crazy on all the stuff, the terrible things going on. And I couldn't argue with him because I didn't have any information, but I said, well, I've been listening to him for 50 years in the back of my head and saying, what happened to this? What happened to this? What happened to this? And I remember all that stuff, and none of it's taken place.
But that doesn't mean that maybe it's because we were hearing it all the time and people were on.
I think it's great. I don't mind that.
People were protecting our country because we were exposing those things in those conversations and talks.
I mean, it's absolutely the freedom of speech that came in this last Supreme Court decision. Is you have the freedom to speak incorrectly. You have the freedom to speak stupidly. You have the freedom to speak hatefully. It's all there. That's all part of freedom of speech. And what happens is, because we believe a free people things will go like this, but we'll keep it in check. And that's what's happened with this Supreme Court decision. It said, I don't care what your best intentions are, President Biden and CDC and the rest of this stuff. If somebody wants to say that some horse medicine is good for COVID, that's their freedom.
Right.
And you've got no business saying that. And that's why I go back. freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. These are absolutes. They're not theories. They're absolutes. And I'd say to anybody out there, if you have a congressman or a senator or a mayor or anybody else who thinks they need to limit freedoms, you get rid of them by due process.
Right. So you're saying, so your answer would be the branches of government are still working strong. And we've always had little trickles in of infiltrations from puppet regime type people and we've always had the threat. It's like a antivirus on our computer, right? We've always had little glitches where but the process of our Constitution is not perfect, but it works.
John Adams pointed out that the best purpose of the Senate is to slow things down. Congress can get in there and pass a law immediately. The Senate is supposed to be a deliberative body. It means a thinking body. And the thinking body doesn't rush into rash decisions. And so we slow it down. A number of things could be far worse. And by the way, I like divided government. I like having one branch of government this leaning and then another branch.
Checks and balances, right? Checks and balances.
Because I want them to slow down. My father, who was an original thinker, he was one that said, they need, every time they pass a law, they need to repeal 5. That's a good idea, actually.
Well, I appreciate this. Is there anything you want to talk about more? Or
oh, I've talked too much. I hope.
No, stop saying that, man. You're not. That's why I have you on. We're going to do it again in the future.
Well, I'm happy to talk to people. And, one of the things that I would...
Don't ever think that you're talking too much. I'm supposed to not talk as much as you. I think I talk too much.
What I would ask people watching this is go read the article in Meridian Magazine and give me comments. Send them to Craig, not to Craig, but sorry, Troy.
You can call me Craig if you want.
No, Troy. Send them to Troy, and we could have another discussion sometime just on what people's questions, things they would like.
Oh yeah, like we could do a live Q&A. Would you like to do that, Mark?
Q&A, and but with that, because I believe there is nothing that should not be discussed. And it needs to be out there. We're a democracy. We're a republic first, but we're based on a Republican democracy, and it needs to come.
I want to ask you one more thing, and this might be too loaded. Maybe I shouldn't be asking this.
It's okay.
But I I noticed you don't. I feel like you feel a little opposite from a lot of other people that I've heard say that our Constitution is, at being threatened right now. Do you? But you seem to be at ease because you're saying these things have always been going on. I mean, look at Eisenhower's last talk when he talked about the military-industrial complex.
Yep.
You're not denying that those things don't happen. You're not denying that there's wicked people sometimes running our government, right?
Absolutely. When I guess my bubble was popped when I was 9 years old, and I was watching TV, and it was disclosed that Gary Francis Power had flown a U-tube into the Soviet Union and was shot down. And Eisenhower looked at the American public and said, "That's not true. We never did that." And I realized our leaders lie to us constantly. They do. I will tell you, I try to do things in moderation and in consideration and thinking of things through. There are times governments will lie, and they have to.
the ends justifies the means. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
Gerald Beale was in our high priest quorum in Vienna, Virginia, and he was President Reagan's one of the heads of national security, and he was also our high priest group teacher. And as he was saying, we were getting in there about honesty, and there was a whole discussion. He goes, I got to stop and have a full disclosure here. He says, as you know, I'm in the president's national security advisory. That's what I do every day. And every day, some reporter will ask a question. If I told them the truth, people literally would die. And other policies would die. He says, what I have to do is this, so I can tell you I lie every day. He said, I have to go home at night and tell myself, I look in the mirror and said, you lied today. That's wrong, but to have told the truth would have been worse. So just don't kid yourself into thinking that you're all that. He says, you're doing it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what espionage is all about.
Absolutely.
We have to, there are things that we have, that's a given, right? We have to protect our what am I trying
national
to say?
Security.
National security from other countries.
But Gerald Beale knew that, but he said, by lying, you get it into your system that it's okay. It's a necessary evil at times. I mean, when your wife says, did you like this meal? Wasn't up to speed.
Well, yeah, and when you calm your children down, if you're like, Dad, are we gonna die? And you're getting ready to have an accident or something, you don't turn to your kids and go, yep, we're gonna die. Or you want to calm them down and go, but then others would disagree with me that are listening to this, go, but yeah, but we're not children, we're all adults out here. Yes, but I think that the question too, Mark, is also, where does that end and begin?
Exactly. That's Beale's point.
The line can keep going to an excessive point.
You have to make sure you tell yourself what I did was wrong, but I'm going to have to do it again if it's going to cost people's lives and destroy this country. They're weighing those kinds of things. That's why I think the turnover, again, I believe it ought to be done voluntarily. We ought to make sure we hold our senators and congressmen to the feet to the fire, that once they've been in there a while, we get somebody else. We need a new blood all the time. And I don't care if it has a D or an R. Some people might be looking at me saying, oh, you're just a right-wing Republican. My first presidential election that I got to vote in was between Nixon and McGovern. And I voted for McGovern, the Democrat, the liberal, because I knew Nixon was a crook. I had seen him operate in California. And I would rather have a fool in the White House than a crook.
Right.
Either
that, or maybe we should be, because look, the other side would argue, okay, so what are you going to do? Brief a new senator every time on everything that's going on that this senator's already been knee deep in and understands.
And I understand all that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
or
I get through that. Yeah.
Or maybe we should stop voting for senators on a geographical area, and it should be because they affect everyone in the United States.
I like it the way it is, but it comes down is American people, do your job. You're getting the government you voted for. You're getting the government you're paying for. And if you don't like it, you better change it. And you have the power to change it. And I've seen that, like I said, Ron Packard down in Southern California. Remember Ron Packard?
Yeah.
He was a congressman there. We got him because Johnny Crean was so awful as a Republican, and his Democrats were even worse. And so we mounted an effort to get Ron Packard elected to Congress as a write-in. It had never been done before. Well, we organized people. We got together. We got a good man. He was a terrific congressman in there on a write-in ballot. Well, consequently, he didn't know anybody anything, and he went in there and was just himself. So we can get into lots of that another time.
All right. So
It's been fun.
yeah. So is it nap time for you, Mark? I'm joking. I thought I would just, I'm joking. I'm
I've
joking.
been sleeping for the last half hour. This is a robot. This is AI.
I figure I'm pretty good friends with you now. I could
Oh
tease
yeah.
you like that.
I
Okay.
would
So
hate it if you didn't.
the article that I'll leave the link to it, but it's Meridian Magazine by Mark Stoddard, Mark J. Stoddard, who we've been talking to. The article is 3 things that keep making the USA great. And there's a lot more in this article that we didn't talk about, especially Clara, her Sitka, and what she had to talk about, and much more. You end your article.
Can I close
Yeah.
with a final statement? It's the beginning of my article. I talk about it. When I first went to the Soviet Union in 1990, I went to a branch of the church that was in Moscow. And in the priesthood meeting, there were about 10 people there, 10, 15 people. And a gentleman who was much older than I am now, but I mean, he was on his last legs. He had, I guess he had family or relatives that had moved to the United States. And he got the opportunity to leave the Soviet Union on a special visa and go to the United States. And then he was talking about his trip, and he said, I went to the Great Land. And this is, I mean, there was a word he was using. I don't know what the Russian word is for Great Land, but it was the Russian word for Great Land. And I saw this, and Great Land, I saw this, and Great Land, I saw that. And I asked the translator, Great Land? He keeps talking about going to a Great Land, the Great Land. What's that? What is it? Someplace in Siberia? He said, the translator looked at me. He wasn't a member of the church. He goes, that's the United States. Don't you know that? And what I'd say to everybody listening to this, the United States is the great land. It is what the Book of Mormon said. And it is true that if we are not a moral people, we will lose the great land. So let's all be active.
Well, you end your article, 2 Nephi chapter 4, verse 4. For the Lord God has said that inasmuch as you shall keep my commandments, you shall prosper in the land. And inasmuch as you will not keep my commandments, you shall be cut off from my presence. Thank you so much, Mark.
Pleasure.
I would have left you the last word, but I wanted to say that little bit that Mark just talked about is also in his article. So
okay,
go read it. It's not a long read. It's great. And let's do a live Q&A soon, maybe even next week.
Yeah, let me know.
Would you be available?
I
mean, we'll do it live. We'll actually do it live.
That'd be good.
Okay. All right. Don't go away. Let me stop the recording.